that said you were a bit muffled. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. We are from the Basic Comprehensive Secondary School right now.
Yes. Can you say something again? Because there's a lady who says you're a bit still muffled. Mr. Ogis?
Okay, let me try from this one here.
That's a lot better.
All right, that one is a lot better. I'm operating from my computer.
Thank you.
Good afternoon once more. Is that better? Are you hearing me?
Yes, much clearer. Okay. And my apologies, Mr. Lionel. Is that Mr. Lionel or?
No, this is Stephen Ogis.
Yes, I know it's Mr. Stephen Ogis, but I said it was a she, but I'm not sure now.
Okay, all right.
But you're much clearer. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're operating from our computer. All right, so let us call our town hall meeting to order. That's okay with everybody?
Yes, 6:01 now.
Yes,
we can commence.
Teachers, principals, parents, and community members, distinguished participants, welcome to this town hall meeting to discuss amendment to the Education Act and to share your views on the Education Act or the amendment proposed to this Education Act. So before we proceed, I would invite Mrs. Ambrose to lead us in prayer. Mrs. Ambrose?
Good evening, everyone. Let us put ourselves in prayers. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and glory and honor for everything for you are the God of all gods and you are the God who goes before us. You are the God who endows each of us with wisdom. And so tonight I pray, God, that your Holy Spirit will be in our midst, even as we discuss. And Lord, we give thought to the amendments of our Education Act. May all that we do be for the benefit of our students, our stakeholders, our community at large. I pray, God, that whatever we discuss this evening, that it will just bring honor and glory to your name. I pray, God, for all the presenters, Lord, that a fresh anointing will rest upon them and wisdom would be tonight. I just give you all the praise and glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambrose. Okay, my name is Stephen Ogis. I'm the Education Officer for District 6. And my task is to be the chairperson of this consultation where we deal with or we address stakeholders who are associated with District 6. So welcome to this consultation to discuss revisions made or revisions proposed to the Education Act as an Lucia. I'm delighted to welcome you to this important session where we'll be collectively reviewing and discussing the Education Act. Education is the cornerstone of societal progress, shaping the minds of future generations and providing the foundation for a thriving and enlightened society. The Education Act plays a pivotal role in defining the framework within which our education system operates. As we embark on this review, it is essential to recognize the significance of our collective efforts in shaping the future of education. The outcomes of our discussions and deliberations will undoubtedly have far-reaching implications for students, teachers, parents, and the broader community. Our goal is to ensure that the Education Act is not only reflective of the current needs and challenges, but is also forward-looking and adaptable to the evolving landscape of education. I encourage each of you to actively participate, share your insights, and engage in constructive dialogue. Your expertise and perspectives are invaluable in shaping the future of education in St. Lucia. Thank you for your commitment to this important endeavor. I look forward to a fruitful and collaborative review process. I now hand you over to our lead consultant, Mrs. Paula Cook McKinnon. Over to you, Mrs. Paula Cook McKinnon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Auguste. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to have you with us in this sixth town hall session that we have held. We've been holding town hall sessions. We held them last week from Monday to Thursday, and we have had one last evening, and we'll continue holding them until Thursday of this week. And we also have dedicated sessions planned with principals and teachers on Friday. The town hall sessions have been incredibly helpful to the work that we're doing to make recommendations regarding the proposed Education Act and regulations. And we encourage you to participate actively this evening. We are here for you to hear your views and to ensure that the Education Act that is drafted reflects the priorities of St. Lucians. With me this evening is Mrs. Fortuna Anthony. Mrs. Anthony is, I'm sure, no stranger to many of you. Mrs. Anthony served as Chief Education Officer in St. Lucia, and she has been incredibly helpful to us in our work as a member of our team in the development of the draft that we are speaking about this evening. Mrs. Anthony, would you like to say hello?
Thank you very much, Paula. Good evening to everyone. And just as Mrs. McKinnon has said, it is our pleasure to be of service to you as we review the Draft Education Act that we have been working on from 2022. So it's almost 2 years, and we are there to serve you, and we have been hearing the voices. We are not completed, but we will hear you this evening. And as she said, please ask your questions, make your comments, and we will serve you to the best of our ability. Thank you very much, Mrs. McKenna.
Thank you. And another of our colleagues, Dr. Monica Williams, will be joining us in about a half an hour, 40 minutes from now. But we will proceed to keep things on schedule. So our schedule for tonight starts at 6, and thank you for starting us promptly at 6. And then we're going to look at just the schedule that you see before you, and the purpose of the town hall meetings. We'll provide you with a brief description of the review process that we have undertaken, and then provide an overview and discussion of the core features of the Draft Education Act and regulations to give you a sense of some of the priority changes that are being recommended from the act that is currently in use, which was developed for the most part in 2005. And then as I mentioned, this session is for you. So we want to explore with you your priorities and hopes for the Education Act and regulations. And our plan is to turn it back over to Mr. Auguste at 7:25 to conclude, and we'll adjourn at 7:30. So we're very respectful of your time and very grateful to you for taking time from your evening to be here with us tonight. So, purpose of these town hall meetings is to describe the review and enhancement of the Education Act. To give you a sense of the process that we have used, and then discuss the core features of the draft act and regulations, to listen to your priorities and hopes for the draft act and regulations, to record your questions and comments, and to address the topics and issues raised in this meeting in the process of our work toward finalization of a draft act and regulations that would proceed through the parliamentary process. In terms of some guides for us for our interaction this evening, we cannot stress enough that your questions and comments are welcome. That's why we're here. We are chairing the meeting, the proceedings, if you will, of the meeting, the agenda. And we, as I mentioned, we started on time and we hope to end on time as well. You can place your comments in the chat if you would like to do that, or we would welcome your comments in your voice. And if you would like to do that, just please raise your hand. You will see an icon on your screen for those of you who have not used raise hand before. It can be more, it can be reaction. It depends on the type of computer that you're using. But if you hit it, you will see an option to raise hand. And please just put your hand up and we will acknowledge you. We're asking that when you share your question or comment, that you take about 3 minutes or so to do that, so that we can ensure that everyone gets a chance to speak during the meeting. In these meetings, some of these meetings, we've had well over 100 people, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to hear as many voices as possible. We appreciate and respect all questions and comments, and ask you to do the same of the fellow participants in the town hall this evening. If there's anything that we've learned over our time working on the Education Act, is that St. Lucians are passionate about education, and persons do not always agree with what might be appropriate to be in the Act. And that's fine. We want to ensure that we hear all opinions and try and recommend what we believe is in the best interest of learners in St. Lucia. So our grounding is always in the learner and what we think would serve them best. So in terms of our work on the review, we started in February of 2022 when the Department of Education contracted with Mindbloom Consulting and St. Francis Xavier University from Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Canada, to partner with St. Lucia educators in the review and enhancement of the Education Act. And this partnership is very important. We are here to facilitate, to bring research-informed thoughts to the process to be as consultative as possible, and to work with you and the leaders in education to come up with something for the Education Act that is both visionary and responsive to the needs of a modern education system. The review was undertaken because the existing Education Act is from 2005, and the Department of Education wants to ensure that the Act meets the needs of this modern education system now and into the future. So we already know from our interaction with many that there are some things that people would desire to have in the Education Act, and you will see some of that this evening. So we know that we know that it doesn't meet your needs now, and so we are looking at how it can better meet your needs into the future. From February 2022 up to the present time, we've conducted extensive stakeholder consultations. We met with groups of stakeholders, students, teachers, principals, the St. Lucia Teachers Union, and consulted with the Attorney General's office, the Teaching Service Commission. We've had considerable input throughout to help us better understand the challenges and the hopes for education. Based on the findings of those initial consultations and research, a draft Education Act and regulations were prepared just about a year later. And that Education Act was circulated and feedback sought. And from that, and we did some sessions as well in terms of presenting and receiving feedback verbally. We received more than 700 suggestions. Once people had an opportunity to look at the draft and consider the draft, we received more than 700 suggestions that were received, reviewed, and acted upon to create the draft that you are now looking at. So we had some consultation, some ideas. We put them in the form of a draft act and regulations. And then when people saw that, they then had the opportunity to think about it and provide even more advice to us about what would be appropriate. And the draft that you see before you now is a major change from the draft that was presented in March of 2023. And so now that we have another draft, we want a person's feedback. So it was decided that it would be very helpful to have these town hall meetings that are open to everyone. And during the town hall meetings, that we would provide a description of the review process that we've done and the progress achieved, to provide you with access to the revised Draft Education Act and regulations, so that you could examine it, and to present to you some of the key themes and changes that have occurred and how the proposed act and regulations are organized, and provide an opportunity for you to contribute to the onward validation and finalization of the Draft Education Act and regulations. So we are continuing to receive feedback, revise, move forward, so that we are getting the best possible draft act and regulations for consideration by Cabinet and Parliament. So what has changed? So the first thing that persons would note in looking at the proposed act is it is very student-centered. So in the what we call the long title, it actually possesses a bit of a vision statement for education in St. Lucia, and it is focused on the learner, and that continues throughout the proposed act, in that everything that we tried to present or amend is we tried to look at it from the student perspective, because education obviously is about the students and it is about all students. So also in the vision, we focus on every student having the opportunity to meet his or her potential. There are expanded definitions and updated language. Education has changed substantially in nearly 20 years. And so now we need definitions and language that reflect more inclusive practice, that talk about various different special needs that learners might have, to talk about different forms of education. In 2005, when education was thought about, it was most often considered in terms of buildings, and that COVID changed that dramatically. So now we think of education in terms of perhaps blended offerings, in terms of distance education, obviously still in terms of face-to-face in the classroom. But we want to make sure that education, the breadth of education is considered. It focuses on holistic education that supports student learning and well-being. So much more focus on students' well-being, their holistic development, versus just their ability to receive and repeat facts, but more so for them to have a deep understanding, to be able to apply learning, and to actually develop socially, emotionally, and really have a well-rounded education, and not just focused on key concepts. The Act also speaks to universal access to education, that all students should be able to access education, to free tuition, that students in primary and secondary should be able to access education without a burden of paying tuition, and the protection from discrimination, so that students should not be discriminated against in accessing education, that students, regardless of their language, their culture, their gender, they should have equal opportunity for education. The proposed act speaks to the establishment of a council on special needs education and inclusive education. And this is to emphasize the importance of inclusive education for all. And so to help guide that, it was the wish of stakeholders that a council be created to advise on ensuring that the education system is as inclusive as possible, and that there are processes and policies in place to ensure that those with special needs are supported. And special needs includes students who may have learning challenges, students who may have some kind of physical challenge that makes it necessary for some adaptations. And it also applies to gifted students who also need special consideration. And this, when you think about education, every learner is unique. And when we have those learners in our system of education, we want to ensure that we are as responsive to every one of them as possible. We have, for the first time, introduced regulations. It was intended that when the Education Act in 2005 was developed, that regulations would also be developed to support it. And so the Act is the foundation for education. It's the framework for education. And then the regulations assist with the um, assist with the ensuring that people know how to apply the act. And so in the regulations, we have also proposed a new national code of conduct. We know that schools have had codes of conducts and they will continue to have specific school rules. But based on feedback that we received from teachers and others, it seemed that it would be helpful if there was a code of conduct that was standard throughout the country, that presented standards for behavior and appropriate dress. And the proposed National Code of Conduct, which is contained in those regulations, actually comes at behavior from a positive perspective. What does a positive school environment look like? How can we ensure that we as a community of learners and teachers and school leaders can create a positive environment? And then if our positive environment isn't maintained, how do we respond to misbehavior? And the proposed code of conduct actually suggests responses to misbehavior, appropriate responses to misbehavior, and actually inappropriate responses to misbehavior, so that it can serve as a guide for educators in managing positive behavior within schools. It is also recommended in the Code of Conduct that everyone have a copy of it and that it be discussed with students early in the year so that everyone understands the expectation for positive behavior in the school community. In addition, the Education Act, the proposed act, expands the compulsory school age from 5 to 15 to 3 years of age to 17 years of age. So that brings in early childhood education and provides the opportunity for pre-kindergarten that's being introduced now, and even early childhood as part of the education system. There's clear authority for educators to discipline students and to protect safety and security. So educators are put in a very difficult situation in schools to try and ensure the safety and security for all learners. So the proposed act and regulations provide support to educators through guidance about what is acceptable for them to do to ensure that though the learners are protected, and recognizing that they are a community, and sometimes it is necessary to act quickly to ensure the safety and security for all. And new types of education, as I mentioned previously, were added. So we have suggested new titles or new types of education include alternative education, which really relates to creating different pathways for students to learn, and focuses again on inclusive education so that students can develop pathways that are best suited to their interests and abilities through the education system. It introduces online and blended education, as I mentioned earlier, because those types of education are used in the system. They can be advantageous and good additions to face-to-face, and sometimes, as we experienced with COVID-19, they might be necessary. And then there are clearly defined rights, duties, powers, and responsibilities for senior ministry officials, for school leaders, that would be principals, vice principals, for teachers, for parents, for students, so that everyone in these school communities, or everyone within the system and the schools, have a clear understanding of what their rights and powers and responsibilities are, and that everyone has certain powers and responsibilities and duties as part of the system. Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Anthony, are you seeing anything in the chat today?
No, there is nothing in the chat to date except that I think it's Miss Emmanuel has posted the link. Yes, Miss Emmanuel has posted the link for the regulations and the bill. That's all
Thank
in
you.
there so far. Welcome.
Thank you. So the Education Act is, the proposed act is divided into sections. And as I mentioned, the first section, called the preliminary, has what we call the long title, or that's what the drafters call it. We like to call it the vision statement, and we would like it to be more of a statement than drafters prefer to see. So there are accepted drafting, legislative drafting guidelines that those drafting legislation use. However, the long title is, as you will see, quite student focused. There's interpretation, which is really the definitions, as I mentioned, that has been significantly expanded to provide definitions for things that are reflected in a modern Education Act. And then the preliminary section also holds purpose of the act. And that has been expanded to include key principles such as high quality, holistic education, universal access to education, and lifelong learning. And the purpose expands on the long title. Part 1 talks about the administration of the education system. So the duties and powers of the minister, the chief education officer, and education officers and education advisory boards. And this has been expanded, and actually based on input that we received, education officers were added into this part of the act to make it very clear the role of education officers in the system of education. Then part 2 are the stages of education and types of education. So the stages are early childhood, primary, secondary, that sort of thing. And the types of education would be things like adult education, alternative education, blended, continuing, distance, inclusive education, special needs, online and technical, and vocational. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these types of education are included, had been included based on our experience with COVID-19. This section of the Act talks about registration, and we are proposing a significant expansion to the homeschooling section of Part 2, which describes that homeschooling will use a national curriculum. It also talks about how homeschooling is monitored and supported. And so based on feedback, that was expanded significantly. And then there is a section on special needs education and inclusive education. Again, something very new in that regard. And that was shaped very much by educators who provided us with excellent feedback on their vision for special needs education and inclusive education in St. Lucia. Part 3 talks about the rights and responsibilities of students, and parents. And the rights of students reflect international best practice and set the stage for the delivery of inclusive, holistic education. So students are responsible to attend school, to do their best, those sorts of things. And parents also have obligations to ensure that their daughters and sons are participating meaningfully in education. So this is outlined in Part 3. Obviously, universal access to education is a right. Free tuition is a right. And as I mentioned, students are accountable as well. Part 4 is admission, attendance, and records. So the school, and it introduces the option of students, while it's not mandatory, if it's advantageous for them to stay beyond age 17. It outlines the importance of the school attendance officer and the role that he or she undertakes. Part 5 describes the national curriculum, instruction and assessment of students, and includes important statements about the promotion of diverse peoples, the unique culture, history, and language, the culture, language, and history of St. Lucia is included in the curriculum, is an important part of the curriculum, and the curriculum is of and for St. Lucians. It also speaks to balanced student assessment. And what this means is that it opens the door for a greater focus on continuous assessment through such activities as formative assessment and a balance between diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment so that students have the opportunity to express their knowledge, skills, and values that have been learned through education in a multitude of ways, and that the emphasis on summative year-end tests or examinations is balanced with other forms of assessment that occur throughout the year. This section also includes comments about collective worship and religious education that might be part of schools within St. Lucia. Part 6 speaks to the management of schools, so boards of management, technical and vocational education, and training council, which actually the TVET council was there previously. It talks about student councils, entrenching student councils, and parent-teacher community associations. And as we were working on the recommendations for the Education Act, there was another group actually working on best practice in terms of parent-teacher associations, and it was their recommendation that we recognize, and I mean we collectively recognize, that the community plays a very important role in education and in supporting learning, and that it was their recommendation that was embraced by those within the Ministry of Education that the associations now be called parent-teacher community associations, to reflect that involvement and to encourage the greater involvement of the community in supporting education and working with parents and teachers to enrich education. Part 7 mentions the National Code of Conduct, school rules, and discipline. So I talked quite a bit about the National Code of Conduct earlier, and its goal of supporting the creation of the creation of a positive school environment. And I mentioned that there are responses included in the proposed code of conduct to student misbehavior. And that includes positive educational types of responses, things like counseling, like meetings to discuss it, and also things like in-school suspensions that are ensure that students are staying in school, but but that there is a response to their misbehavior. So we looked for responses to misbehavior that would actually focus a lot on learning and have students understand why their actions are considered to be misbehavior and not in compliance with the National Code of Conduct. And then, if necessary, and of course there will be circumstances where it is necessary, to have things like suspensions, both in school and perhaps out of school suspensions. There is in this section in Part 7, there is a proposed section on search and seizure, which provides members of the school community, teachers, principals, vice principals, with the right to search and seize materials that might be harmful to the school environment. So there's guidance there to enable those who are in authority in schools to do that if, in fact, they believe that school safety is compromised. And of course, there's a right to a disciplinary response. So if a school or a school leader makes a decision and the student and or their parents believe that it was an inappropriate response, the rights for an appeal are described in this section. The rights and duties of educators are described in Part 8, and there is a grouping of educators that includes principals, vice principals, teachers, and guidance counselors. And there's a general section that talks about the rights of educators, and then specific duties of principals, vice principals, teachers, and school guidance counselors, and also rights. So there's a general category with rights and duties that apply to all, and then it becomes more specific with principals, vice principals, teachers, and school counselors. Section 9 talks about the St. Lucia Island Scholarship, the value of the scholarship, the right of cabinet to determine how many scholarships, qualification and examination for scholarship, on what grounds scholarships would be forfeited, the bonding of scholarship recipients, and the awarding of grants and bursaries. That the actual section was contained is contained in the existing act, and it was modified slightly based on input that we received. Part 10 actually deals with appeals. So again, if any kind of a ruling occurs within the system of education, there is an appeals process, and Part 10 talks about the process, the timelines, and how appeals would be considered. Part 11 is what is called miscellaneous, and it really includes things that don't have a natural place in the other parts of the Education Act. So the requirement for a annual report to be presented each year on the status of education. It contains a section on contagious diseases, on closure of schools, loitering on school premises, insurance, vendors on school premises, prohibition of sale of alcohol, and those sorts of things. So those are contained in the miscellaneous section of the proposed act. So that's just obviously the act is detailed, and there are detailed descriptions within each section and detailed wording, but we just wanted to present this evening an overview for you of what is contained in the proposed Education Act and how that differs from what is currently in the or what is contained in the current act.
Paula, may I
So-
say we have two questions?
Wonderful.
The first one is there anything anything incorporated for the involvement in the various uniform groups in schools? Is there anything?
Just
Somebody's music. Somebody's music.
yeah, there we go.
Somebody's music is very loud. The question was on whether there is anything in the act to incorporate involvement in the various uniform groups in the schools. For example, guides, cadets, cubs, and this sort of thing. I am sure we would be able to look at the regulations.
Yes, I think, in terms, I don't think, obviously within the act or the regulations, we couldn't speak in a detailed way about all the possibilities of all the extracurricular possibilities that could exist. However, there is statements about the development of the entire sort of the whole student, this holistic approach, which by inference would include involvement with things that would support character development or support their interests. I noticed that Dr. Williams has joined us. Dr. Williams, is there anything that you would add to that?
Thank you, Paula, and good evening, everyone. I would just add to that in the purpose of the Education Act, which is located toward the front of the Act, there are statements that address, as Paula pointed out, the purpose is to provide a high-quality education for all students that supports their learning development and well-being and enables them to reach their full potential as learners and citizens. And certainly extracurriculars contribute to that. Also, there is a purpose that it provides quality curriculum assessment, teaching, learning, and leadership. And oftentimes in extracurricular groups like Scouts or Guides, which were mentioned, those organizations are developing the leadership potential of children and youth. And the Act supports that type of development through the purpose, as well as the vision for student success that's at the beginning.
And if I may add, Mrs. McKernan, that we also incorporated the statement that principals do have the ability, the option in their curriculum to add in anything which will further develop the students. So that it takes into consideration, as Dr. Williams said, we have the holistic development of the child. We have a second question. Does the new legislation have in place an established procedure to deal with misconduct to ensure that there is uniformity in dealing with misconduct?
That is music to my ears. Yes, that is really the thrust of the proposed new code of conduct, is to introduce guidelines that bring about uniformity, and to create to have the proposed code of conduct shared among all across the country, so there's an understanding of the types of responses that would be appropriate if misbehavior occurs. So that is exactly the purpose of the National Code of Conduct, and also the thrust that that each school would really to talk about expectations for positive behavior and how everybody contributes to that, and everyone wants to create a positive environment in their school. They're sort of home away from home, if you will, in the education system. So it does come with the thrust that supports principals, vice principals, and teachers in creating that positive environment, and supports them in doing that, and having everyone in that environment understand that they all have a role to play. And then if persons do not behave in the manner that's accepted in the school, what the implications are. So yes, uniformity, consistency, that was the desire, to give teachers and vice principals and principals the tools that are consistent throughout the country to create those positive school environments and respond to misbehavior. Thank you for that question.
Another question for you. As it pertains to vendors, is there a difference between schools, premises, and school property? As pertains to vendors, is there a difference between school premises and school property?
Dr. Williams may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the way that it is worded is that it's vendors and the regulation, the guidelines for vendors it relates to school property. So it isn't just restricted to the building, but actually the property. Dr. Williams, am I correct there?
Thank you, Mrs. McKinnon. I'm just looking at the section there, section 199, vendor on school premises. So it speaks to the restrictions on vendors on school premises. And that's the terminology that is used throughout from what I'm seeing. And I would just say with regard to premises and property, there's no differentiation there. However, premises is a word that's used in other parts of the Act. For example, in Section 201, they also talk about the prohibitions against loitering on school premises. So premises seems to be the word that's used most often. Thank you.
And so premises, in terms of our interpretation, are more than the building. They are actually school property. So I think that premises is broadly interpreted in terms of the Act.
That's correct. It would include the playgrounds, associated facilities of the school, all of those different components of a school compound really would be incorporated under the premises. So it's broadly interpreted in that way.
Thank you for that question.
Yes. There's another question.
This is wonderful.
Breach of procedure should be ground for appeal. So if there is no set procedure, how are the authorities going to be held accountable for not following proper procedure?
So the Act, in terms of the responsibilities of various persons in the education system, they have responsibilities for certain procedures. If those procedures are breached, there's a process by which someone can raise that and have a response to that. So the Act actually has the ability for persons within the education community to raise improper procedure, and that would be in terms of, for example, the appeal process. That would be certainly grounds for appeal if a improper process were undertaken, and then obviously the that would, if the appeal were successful, that would change the outcome of whatever the decision was. So the Act is very clear about that process and how it is undertaken in terms of response to whoever believes that something has been inappropriately done within the system.
Another question. In the beginning of this meeting, you mentioned that we might not always agree to what might be appropriate to be in the Act for best interests of the learner.
So there's
Did
a
you hear
question?
that?
Yes, I heard that.
Yeah,
That's a statement.
I think it is more a statement.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think the way that I put it is that we might not always agree and on what is best suited for the Act, but what we always try to do is ensure that what ends up in the Act is in the best interest of the learner. So we have endeavored in the work that we have done to make recommendations that reflect the vision that every learner has a right to education, has a right to holistic education, and always come back to that learner-centered focus in the recommendations that we make for what should be included in the Act.
We have that followed by this question. Is it in the best interest of the learners to have their teachers with or little to no protective rights? This is a strange question. Is it in the best interest of the learners to have their teachers with less or little to no protective rights?
Well, we would not believe that teachers have less protective rights. The rights of teachers are outlined in the Education Act, and we believe that as a matter of fact, several of the pieces of the Education Act that we've introduced are actually to support and protect teachers and school leaders in their work. So if there is something that the person believes is not protecting teachers in their work, we would love to know about it, because we endeavored to do everything that we could to support teachers, vice principals, principals, to create positive school environments that protect all.
Followed by this one. Do you think that these removals will lead to an excitement of teachers or the exodus from the system?
Well, there's a suggestion here that there's a removal of rights, and I don't believe that teachers' rights have been removed from the Act. There may be a case where the Act and the Teaching Service Commission Act overlapped. And in that case, of course, the Teaching Service Act takes prominence, because that is where teachers, actually, that's the process through which teachers are appointed. So in some cases, what has to be considered in looking at rights are the rights that the system, the legislative system, provides to people through the Constitution, through the Teaching Service Commission, and through the Education Act. So there, as I said previously, there is no intention here to take away any protections from teachers. Quite the contrary. We believe there are things in the Act that actually strengthen the protection of those in school communities to do their work.
On the issue
and I'm sorry, and I would add to that this is a draft, and if there is something that a person is concerned about in terms of a right being taken away, we would be happy to respond to that and either show where the right exists, or if in any case we have in fact inadvertently created a situation that has a teacher or principal or school leader or education officer believe that they are more vulnerable, we would want to know specifically what that would be so that we could address it.
Next question, on the issue of the common cold or the flu, will school authorities be more effective in enforcing the stay-at-home policy?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
On the issue of the common cold/flu.
Oh, yes.
Will school authorities be more effective in enforcing the stay-at-home policy?
Well, there is a section on contagious disease, but remember that this is an education act, and so it is a broad foundation. It doesn't get into the detail of advising or telling or directing school authorities on when students should and should not be at school. That would be more related to professional judgment and to managing the school community. So again, the Education Act is a foundational document that has the sort of the outline of how the education system operates. It does not get into specifics, that level of detail. Dr. Williams, did you want to respond to that? And is there anything that I've missed there?
Thank you for the question. As Mrs. McKinnon has pointed out, contagious diseases are dealt with in the Act generally in Section 197. And it does state that a student suffering from or exposed to a contagious disease shall not enter the premises of the school or be permitted to remain in the school. However, every situation is unique, and the principal and the teachers, the principal in charge of the school, has the leeway to make decisions about students going home. So contagious diseases are referenced. There's a process described for the principal to report the contagious diseases to the chief education officer and the chief medical officer. That is outlined in the Act.
And if I may add, I think we have seen with the present climate, school policies have been developed along with parents at the various schools, parent communities, so that children, but again, you know, we must also understand that sometimes a child wakes and is fine by the time they get to school, or, you know, so there are many issues. So, and please know that we want to hear. Somebody says, will a copy of the draft be made available to educators before enacting? Is there currently a link for it? I am sure that Ms. Emmanuel, at the beginning of the meeting, if we look into the chat, there is a link made available so that if you can access, if you're on your thing, the link is there. www.equip.education.gov.lc/public-notices and documents. So you can go back and you can copy that link and you can just place it in your bar and you will be able to download the document. I think we have a couple more. Questions? Just let me get back to the bottom, to the top. Yes. Can the act include compliance to standards of appropriate dress for parents and visitors?
The National Code of Conduct thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. The National Code of Conduct actually applies to those in the school community. And the National Code of Conduct does speak to dress and appropriate dress. And it is intended to capture everyone who is within the school community as a volunteer, or whatever. So it is intended to be inclusive and to provide guidelines. Again, with the suggested dress guidelines, it talks about positive sort of what is respectful attire, and tries to create the understanding within a school community about respectful dress and appearance, and how that creates a positive environment. So it comes at it from a positive way and then provides some guidelines. Dr. Williams, anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, thank you, Paula. That's everything.
Yes, and I think on page 41 of the regulations, it is well spelled out. So, next question. With online learning, we have new misbehaviors to address. What are the school's role, responsibilities in dealing with disruptive behaviors in an online classroom?
Thank you. And if this is, we thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. And it's one of the reasons that St. Lucia needs a new Education Act and supporting regulations, because in the National Code of Conduct, there is one of the misbehaviors cited is cyberbullying. So these new types of misbehavior are captured and then become part of the discussion of how to, first of all, because they're included and because the code of conduct will be discussed, we anticipate that there would be discussions within schools about what constitutes something like cyberbullying, and then what would be expected positive behavior related to online interaction, so that as part of the learning experience, students understand what the expectations are of the school community in terms of online interaction. And then students also understand that when a situation occurs that is not positive in terms of online interaction, there are responses. And those responses can be educational, or they can be more of a type of response that actually encourages greater accountability. We obviously, as I mentioned, we prefer educational responses, and that can actually be some kind of a reformative process. There's any number of them that are listed in the proposed code. But it is very important, as you have alluded to in your question, that these sorts of misbehaviors be identified, and that principals, vice principals, and teachers feel empowered to respond to them just as they would respond to some of the more traditional forms of misbehavior that we're familiar with.
We have another question. Open flames are not permitted. Roofs and coal pots are still used for cooking. will schools have the discretion to use these?
So the act is dealing with education. And thank you for the question. And we can certainly understand why you would be concerned. The schools are obviously the act talks about educational programs and the delivery of education. The schools, there is a section in the act that deals with the inspection of schools and the responsibility of educators to maintain a safe environment. So this type of thing would fall under that, but we would fully expect that there would be policy in terms of what is acceptable in schools, in terms of the maintenance of safety, in terms of the structure and operation of buildings, that would complement the act, but that level of detail could not be included in the act.
May I ask a question, Mrs. McKenna, to
Of
the
course.
person who posted this question? Is it an everyday use or is it for cultural activities? Because I'm very much aware that some seasons with our Journée Creole, etc., you know, cooking on coal pots become, or is it the norm or what? Is it a daily occurrence?
If I could join in here, please, Mrs. McKinnon.
Sure.
With regard to the requirements around open flames, not using them on school premises, that's referenced in the regulations. The section that starts on page 9 about school fundraising activities in public schools and assisted schools. And it talks about limitations on, for example, alcoholic beverages cannot be sold or served, that personal items cannot be sold during school fundraising activities, etc. And it says in section 23, part 2, rather, a fire or an open flame, with the exception of that emitted by a stove, shall not be allowed inside a public school or an assisted school building. So this is referenced in the regulations with regard to fundraising activities. In part 3, it says, however, a barbecue grill or a fire shall be kept away from a public school or an assisted school building and outside the reach of students. So that sounds to me that there was a recognition that there may be barbecues used, for example, at fundraising activities, but they have to be kept at a distance from the public school or assisted school and beyond the reach of students. And this is an instance where, as Paula has mentioned earlier, there are many intersections between the Education Act and the regulations and other laws in St. Lucia. And so fire safety requirements would place limitations on having open flames on school premises. And there would be fire safety requirements around inspections of schools and fire drills. So this is where that particular prohibition is cited in the regulations in relation to fundraising activities at schools.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. That's great.
Another question, will there be any inclusion of parenting workshops for parents at all schools, at all levels of the education system? Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So the Education Act actually speaks to the importance of parents and speaks to the importance of their involvement and their meaningful involvement. And we would anticipate that through the parent-teacher community organization, that parents who would feel it beneficial to attend workshops or sessions on enhancing their ability to support their sons or daughters in school, that would be available to them. But the Act does not require that those types of supports be there. That it's actually it is required of parents to ensure that they are able to support their sons or daughters in their active participation in school, and to ensure that they are at school and that they are supported in that work. So it is a requirement for parents, and it is quite likely the role of these parent-teacher community associations to support parents in that role. Dr. Williams, did you want to add anything there?
No, thank you, Paula. That's fine.
The question had gone on further to ask what plan is in place for this, because the individual said children cannot learn if parents lack the necessary skills to attend to them holistically. What plans are in place for this?
Well, once again, there is nothing specific in the Education Act that requires anyone to provide parents with a program. It is actually the parents' requirement to ensure that their children participate meaningfully in education. And so we believe that because that requirement is articulated in the Act, that educators can call upon it to say to parents, this is your responsibility to support us in educating your son or daughter, and to work with parents if the parents express that they are challenged or are not able to, or whatever, to work with the parents to access programs that will enable them to be more supportive of their sons and daughters if in fact they aren't being supportive. It is we would hope that all parents would want to be. The other thing that is strengthened here is the role of the community, because we do know in our communities that sometimes where parents are not as willing or receptive to be supportive of the education of their sons and daughters, that the community supports that. And opening creating in the Act this opening for greater community involvement also leads to another option or opportunity for communities to support education and students in their learning.
I have another. Of late, we have seen a marked increase in delinquent and criminal behavior portrayed by children from the primary school level and above. What plans are in place to address effective conflict resolution skills being taught to students and teachers? Can perhaps this be taught from an early age, as early childhood education to tertiary level education? Can it be part of the curriculum?
That's a very good question. I just wanted to go to the section of the Act that talks about the national curriculum. So unless Dr. Williams, you're there already, or Mrs. Anthony, because I think in terms of the national curriculum, it actually focuses on content, skills, and values is a component of that, which opens the door for the type of programming that you're talking about as part of the curriculum. And if you would just bear with me for a moment, I'll pull that up. Unless someone gets there ahead of me, which is totally fine.
While you're doing that, Paula, if I could speak to this as well, because it is an excellent question. In the National Code of Conduct, in the regulations on page 39, for example, it talks about the importance of teaching positive behavior to students. It also speaks about prevention, including bullying prevention programs, cyber safety programs, and progressive discipline. Further to what Paula was saying, teaching students essential knowledge, values, and skills for positive behavior through various programs and supports, such as character development education, citizenship programs, and anger management counseling. Also, with regard to conflict mediation, in terms of responses to student misbehavior, one of the strategies that teachers can use that's listed on page 44 in the regulations is conflict mediation. And I would also add that at the start of the Act, one of the enhancements that we're recommending under the powers of the minister is the provision of educational psychosocial supports. And under that heading, you can provide social emotional programs for children starting in preschool and going right on up through to tertiary, as you're asking. So there is an accommodation there in the Act through educational psychosocial supports. And there are many excellent programs out there for young children and for older children and youth. And this is an excellent question. And the Act and the regulations would accommodate that. And we're also making note with regard to the curriculum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And in terms of the national curriculum that's described in Schedule 5 of the proposed regulation, Part 2 says the program of instruction shall be based on curriculum outlines in each subject prepared and developed by the various curriculum committees and approved by the Chief Education Officer, and shall also emphasize the inculcation of positive social attitudes to include citizenship, national and regional identity and appreciation of democratic values, tolerance, conflict management, spirituality, value of self, and ability to live together. So that is actually outlined in the national curriculum that's contained in Schedule 5 of the regulations. And that is in support, or I guess you would say that the Code of Conduct supports the curriculum, and likewise the curriculum supports the Code of Conduct.
One more question. On the last occasion, it was said that the Act could not cater to out-of-school situations. But don't you believe the behavior of students on their way to and from school can negatively impact the school, since those students can be identified through their uniforms and as such should be governed by the Act?
So we've had extensive conversations about this, and students can wear uniforms for extended period of time when they're not on school premises, and we believe that there is parental and family responsibility and student responsibility for appropriate behavior beyond the school compound, and that it is the responsibility of the student and or the parents to ensure appropriate behavior at all times, whether or not they are in school uniform. We also thought that it is difficult and perhaps almost unfair to ask school leaders and teachers to assume some responsibility for managing student and responding to student behavior beyond the school premises. So, to date, we have come down in this draft on indicating that the scope of the National Code of Conduct applies to student members of the school community when on school premises or participating in school activities off beyond the premises.
We have another one. Will the new mandatory pre-kindergarten education be available for free?
The act says that school, schooling that occurs between the mandatory age of 3 to 17 is provided without tuition. Now we know that the Ministry of Education and the government and those who pay taxes to support the government have limitations on what is possible. So the act is meant to be visionary in nature, to have a goal to work toward, but it is not expected that instantly all programs offered for learners from age 3 to 17 would be provided by the government, but that over time that would be possible.
We have another question here.
This is wonderful. Yes.
The bill gives teachers, principals, etc., the liberty to conduct and search on a student upon both reasonable suspicion. It also gives them the right to conduct a random search. Arbitrary searches are prohibited by the Constitution. Are these legal documents clashing? What happens if a parent decides to sue on the ground that the constitutional right of the child has been violated?
This again was discussed extensively, and we do have, as a member of our team, Ms. Kim St. Clair, who is a lawyer and a drafter, and who actually served as Attorney General for St. Lucia. She has looked into this extensively and believes that if educators feel that the safety and security of the school environment is compromised by a student or a member of the community, then the educator has the right to conduct a search to be sure that the environment is safe, and that the conduct or the searching and perhaps seizure, if it is in response to a concern that others are in danger or the individual is in danger, then that is not in conflict with constitutional rights. Dr. Williams, did you want to add to that?
No, Paula, that's fine.
Are we taking the rest of the questions? We have a few of them, or would you like to come back to the questions?
No, yes, I think we should. We're actually dipping into the regulations, which is the next slide in the presentation anyway. So this is a wonderful way to dip into the regulations. So yes, it's important that persons be able to ask their questions.
Is there anything concerning the use of school premises for social activities to curtail the introduction of, there's some words that disappear, of likes or the introduction of substances like alcohol or drugs onto those premises, whether school is in operation or not. Is there anything concerning the use of on the school premises of alcohol and drugs?
Yes, most definitely. So there's rules in the proposed regulations around, or actually no, there's rules in the proposed act around extracurricular activities and the consumption of alcohol. And obviously illegal use of drugs is included in the National Code of Conduct, the proposed National Code of Conduct. So there are guidelines with regard to that contained in the Act and regulations. Did you want to provide additional detail, Dr. Williams?
Yes, thank you, Paula. In the miscellaneous section at the end of the Draft Education Act, Section 200 is the prohibition of the sale of alcohol, tobacco, cigarettes, drugs, and drug paraphernalia. And in this section, it states that a person who sells, offers, or exposes for sale, so a wide range there, alcohol, tobacco, cigarettes, drugs, or drug paraphernalia on the premises of a school, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 2 years or both. So there is a prohibition and also the consequences for that. In addition, the next section of the Act 201 describes the ban against loitering on school premises. So there are provisions made in the Act to prevent alcohol and drugs on school premises and loitering as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have another one here. Is there anything attaching civil liability to parents for certain actions by the children while under the care and the control of the school?
Civil liability. Dr. Williams, can you respond to that one?
There is, in terms of the rights and duties of parents, as Mrs. McKinnon has alluded to earlier, duties for parents to communicate and collaborate with the school and the education of their child, to ensure that their child attends school regularly and punctually. There's also student accountability spelled out in the Act, to follow the direction of teachers, for example, to participate in the educational programming that's provided for them. But there's nothing specific about civil liability of parents if their child breaches the behavior standards, for example. That's not addressed explicitly in the Act or the regulations.
Thank you.
We have another one. Is there a relaxation method for teachers and students during stress-related issues? For example, massage sessions for release of stress.
So the National Code of Conduct that is contained in the proposed regulations talks about maintaining a positive school environment, talks about creating an environment where stress is minimized as much as possible. But we do recognize that there are times when persons are stressed, and that can be any person in a school environment, student, teacher, and programs such as those are usually something that is negotiated in terms of teachers, principals, vice principals, and others. Those supports are usually things that are negotiated as part of employment or part of contractual relationships through a union, or in terms of teachers being appointed through the Teaching Service Commission. So those sorts of things that we would call employment supports are normally left to in employment agreements. Now, in spirit, in terms of the Education Act and the proposed regulations, there is a responsibility of all to create a positive school environment to help minimize those stressful situations. So it's described, I would say, in terms of the Act and the regulations, more through a preventative approach than a responsive approach that would be more of an employment-related action.
One more. We have one more here.
Wonderful.
For students who are not immunized for religious purposes, beliefs, will they be denied acceptance in the education system?
Actually, this is something that has come up in an earlier town hall, and it's something that we have committed to looking into more thoroughly in terms, actually, those within the Ministry of Education have actually asked us to look into it more thoroughly, so that the Act could be it could include a process for those who are not immunized because of religious because of the religion. So right now it is probably more restrictive than persons would want, but it is something that has been raised and something that we will look at in terms of drafting the next version of the Act, of the proposed Act.
I think this is the last.
Oh, so go ahead, Dr. Williams. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to flag, there was several questions here about safeguarding. Mm-hmm. My question is concerning safeguarding. Does the Act consider nuanced factors such as teachers and students facing mental health challenges?
Mm-hmm. You go right ahead, Dr. Williams.
Thank you for the question. And mental health and wellness is a very important consideration, especially in the wake of the pandemic. We have updated, for example, the categories of special needs in the Act to include mental health challenges. And as Mrs. McKinnon has pointed out, with regard to positive behavior, we've really emphasized the provision of supports. We recognize that some students misbehave in association with mental health challenges. So we've recommended supportive measures be put in place for the students who require them. The next question is, additionally, does the amendment explicitly address or encompass provisions that attend to specific needs of students dealing with mental illnesses within the scope of safeguarding measures? And as I've just stated, we have emphasized the provision of behavioral supports in the Act and also in the National Code of Conduct and the regulations. And as mentioned earlier, educational psychosocial supports may be offered by the minister, and they would assist, some of them would assist students with mental health challenges as well. Just carrying on with this list of questions. Moreover, within the purview of teacher-student safety, will the amended Act underscore the significance of stringent background checks for educators? Here's an area where, as Mrs. McKinnon has pointed out, we have another crossover with legislation, for example, with the Teaching Service Commission, who are the body that lead the hiring and appointment of educators. So the background checks would fall under their jurisdiction, and for that reason, it's not addressed in the Act. And the last one in this sequence, will it elucidate measures to ensure diligent enforcement of our periodic appraisals, thereby preventing the presence of unsuitable or unqualified individuals within educational environments? And again, the intersection here is with the legislation and the oversight of the Teaching Service Commission. I don't know, Mrs. McKinnon, if you wanted to speak to that further.
So the Act does indicate that if an educator is not upholding their responsibilities, then there is the avenue to report it to the Teaching Service Commission. So it does actually, the Education Act does link over to the Teaching Service Commission, which, based on the advice that we have received legally, that's really about as far as the Education Act can go without infringing on the rights of the Teaching Service Commission as outlined in that legislation.
And
Excellent question. Thank you.
two final questions in this section. Under the duties of the principal, there seemed to be a lot of reporting to the chief education officer, which seems to diminish the role of the education officer. Can the duties be framed in such a way that there is a stronger supervisory relationship between the principal and the education officer?
That's a very good question. Thank you. The duties of the chief education officer can be delegated. And so what we were trying to do in terms of introducing the role of the education officer into the Education Act and outlining the role of the education officer was to outline general responsibilities, but provide the opportunity for the chief education officer to delegate as appropriate. So we were trying to create a balance between things that would naturally fall into an education officer's domain and those that could be at the discretion of the chief education officer delegated to the education officer, keeping in mind that those roles could change over time. So yes, it is certainly something that we could look at to make the role of the education officer as defined in the Act more fulsome, but we also want to ensure that there is the opportunity for evolution over time. So I've noted that. Thank you.
And there is a last comment here. I'm sorry that this must have jumped and I missed a few questions. I think the misunderstanding regarding the question is not about passing on responsibility of students' behavior outside of school premises to school administration, but to provide the school the legislative authority to take action to protect the school should it be necessary.
So thank you for that comment and for that clarification. But from our perspective, if you actually provide that authority, you're also creating an expectation, and so our recommendation was that the requirement on those at the school to manage behavior off the school property would be limited. And so we understand what you're saying about giving them the right to do that, but also with that right, we believe comes an expectation.
That's it so far, Mrs. McKenna.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for those excellent questions and comments. In terms of where we are, oh, sorry. There we are. So in terms of the draft regulations, and keep in mind that these draft regulations are the first to be. Oops, just one moment, please. are the first are the first time that regulations would be in place to support the Education Act, at least in recent history. And they are designed to provide greater detail on the operation of the Education Act. So in the preliminary section, the regulations are linked to the Act. So that it is very clear that they support the Act. In Part 1, the administration of schools, it addresses the school year in terms of number of instructional days. And one of the things that we heard from stakeholders, including teachers, was that there is concern about the ability to cover the curriculum and ensure that learners have the opportunity to learn everything in the number of days available. So in terms of the regulations, that's described. It provides also information on the school day and school calendar and when school vacations occur. It talks about the establishment of school timetables to, again, fully address the curriculum. It talks about student admission. It talks about student admission and zoning. And then Part 2 talks about the national curriculum, and I described some of that in Schedule 5, that is included in Schedule 5. And in that national curriculum, there is the aligning with the National Qualifications Framework, which again is something that has been introduced in St. Lucia. And then the national curriculum describes primary and secondary curriculum. And one of the things that we that has been raised in these town hall sessions is that we do not describe currently in the national curriculum an early childhood curriculum and generally what would be comprised there. And that is something that we've taken under advisement and we will seek to address in response to or as we prepare the proposed version or the version of the next version of the proposed act and regulations. And then Part 3 addresses the management of schools and talks about the management of public schools, assisted schools, private schools, talks about homeschooling, so provides more detail about homeschooling, about school visits and inspections, and that section has been, there was no section before, and so that provides significant detail in terms of what would happen during school or during visits and inspections, so that people understand what can happen during those visits and inspections. Part 4 describes the detail on councils and association, Students' Council, National Students' Council, Parent-Teacher Community Associations, National Council of Parent-Teacher Community Associations. Part 5, which we've talked about in quite a bit of detail tonight, talks about the National Code of Conduct. And then associated with Part 5 is Schedule 8, which actually contains the proposed National Code of Conduct. Part 6 talks about discipline and disciplinary complaints and the hearing of disciplinary complaints. Part 7 provides an appeal process. And then Part 8 has miscellaneous schedules and forms, such as application forms, registration forms, those sorts of things. So that is the overview of the regulations, much of which we have discussed through the question and answer that has gone on during the session this evening. So are there any further questions that you might have about, or comments that you might have about the regulations? Okay. And then if you would, either in the chat or or raise your hand and share with us what are the top 3 priorities that need to be addressed in the Draft Education Act and Regulation from your perspective. So what things do you think are most important for to exist in the Draft Education Act and Regulations? And secondly, what do you hope will come out of the Draft Education Act and Regulations? So what are your hopes for this process of defining a new Education Act and Regulations? So if you can think about that and perhaps post that in the chat or raise your hand and describe those to us, that would be helpful, because that helps us get a sense of what is most important to you who have taken the time to be with us this evening. Anyone want to comment there? So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned at the outset, we are holding these town hall meetings to provide you with an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments about the proposed act and regulations. As you would have known when you came into the meeting, the meeting is being recorded, and we will analyze to identify the main topics and issues that have been raised in the town hall meetings. These topics and issues will be addressed in the next version of the draft act and regulations, and based on what we're hearing, there are many common things that we need to consider, in particular areas of the Act and regulations that we will respond to in terms of the sections of the proposed Act and regulations. And then from our perspective and the work that we have in this consultancy, we will generate a final draft Education Act with our recommendations and an accompanying report, and submit that to the Ministry of Education for advancement, we hope, through the approval process. So we are your consultants. We serve to advise and make recommendations on the proposed Education Act and regulations. And then it is the vision that those would then be advanced through the approval process of your duly elected cabinet and parliament, so that the Education Act will be a much more modern act that serves to support you and the learners in the vision for education that you have, and that at the same time, the regulations will be approved, the accompanying regulations will be approved to support educators as many of you in the participating this evening are educators, to support you and the members of school communities to enact what is contained in the Education Act once approved. So our work has been that of consultation and recommendation and identifying areas of concern from stakeholders and responding to that. And that's what we continue to do as we will develop the next draft of the proposed Education Act and regulations.
We have 3 priorities listed.
Oh, wonderful.
There. Yes. In fact, we have more than 3. We have student discipline, school safety,
excellent,
equitable allocation of resources for schools island-wide, the National Code of Conduct, management of schools, rights and responsibilities of parents, students, and educators.
Thank you. That's excellent. So we have gone past time, but we are very happy to do it, and we are very happy for your questions and comments this evening. One never knows when 6 o'clock comes and we have and we start off, one never knows where the conversation will head. And tonight, the questions and the comments have enabled a rich discussion and exchange. We didn't hear many voices, but we did see lots of questions and comments in the chat, and we are very, very grateful to you for taking the time this evening and for your to participate actively in this town hall session. I would just like to say thank you to those of you who are to you for participating this evening, and for those of you who are participating from the school. We wish you a safe travel home, and thank you for leaving your homes this evening and coming to a central location to participate in this town hall. On that, I will turn it over to my colleagues, Dr.
Before you turn it over, let me just acknowledge 3 more.
Go ahead, Mrs. Anthony. Yes, please.
Special education support services and access. Ensure parents play a role in getting children tested. Support
nice.
For teachers, mental wellness and health.
Thank you.
These just came in. I
Nice.
think we were thinking.
Yes, that's great. And Mrs. Anthony, would you like to add anything to the closing?
No, just to say that I think in spite of not hearing voices, just as you said, the discourse has been very rich. I wanted to ask if there was anything that we had left out that we should have put in there. But I think as the questions came, things have been covered well, and I just need to add my voice to say sincerest thanks to everyone, those who are online with us and those who might be at the Binfield School where they were meeting in person. We thank you ever so much, and we have heard your voices. We will take into consideration the matters that you have raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Anthony. And Dr. Williams?
I would just like to echo sincere thanks for the questions and the participation this evening. It's been very helpful, and we really appreciate the input of St. Lucians in this really important work. Thank you all.
Thank you. And Mr. Auguste, we will turn it over to you to close the meeting and to thank you for chairing this important meeting this evening. Over to you, Mr. Auguste.
Thank you, Mrs. Paula McKinnon. Mrs. Paula McKinnon, Mrs. Fortuna Anthony, Dr. Monica Williams, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Principals and teachers, thank you very much for your cooperation and ensuring that we have participants at tonight's town hall meeting. Parents, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow community members, I want to express my sincere gratitude to everyone of you for your thoughtful contribution and engaged participation. Tonight, we have witnessed a diverse array of perspectives, ideas, and concerns. Our town hall meeting has served as a platform for open dialogue, fostering an environment where ideas have been shared. I want to assure you, colleagues in District 6, that your voices have been heard. The collective wisdom shared will be invaluable as we work towards shaping policies that will impact not only our current generation of students, but generation to come. Thank you once again for your time, passion, and dedication. Good night, and may our shared commitment to education continue to guide us on this important journey. Thank you very much. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening. And thank you for the people who accompanied us here at the Binfield Comprehensive Secondary School. We are signing off from the Binfield Comprehensive Secondary School. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
I don't like this computation.
Get home safely.
All right, we will.
Yes.
Yes, we will.
Those who are at home, keep safe as well. But those
Good
who came
night.
out, get home safely. God bless.
Okay, bye.